Hey Chevra, what's happening? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei Vav of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 86. Yeah, it's a cool daf. It's not too difficult. And I guess like the two main kind of sugyas that we talk about is another version of a pit between two hatzeirs. This time it's kind of split down the middle, like shared by two hatzeirs. Wow, whoa. It's windy out. You guys hear that? Probably not. But it sounds pretty windy. And then at the end we talk a little bit about a sukkah, really in the context of good achis and good asik, when you have walls that don't quite reach the schach or don't quite reach the ground. We get involved in that sugya, a shtickle. At the end, Chevra, we're going to start on Daf Pei Hey Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda Omer im yesham tfisas yad v'chulei. So in our Mishnah that we had learned yesterday, so it said that if you have a bala bayis, you have a homeowner, and he like rents out some space or lends out some space, whatever it might be, to some people. If he still has items in that space, well then it's considered like he still is living there. And then that apartment does not need to participate in the Ayruvin hatzeirs. So says the Gemara, Hechidami, Tfisas Yad. What's an example of Tfisas Yad of a homeowner who has things still in these like additional apartments that he has? Kigon Chatzer shel Bonius ben Bonius. It's like in the Chatzer of Bonius ben Bonius. Apparently, this fellow Bonius was really quite wealthy, very, very wealthy. And so in his Chatzer, he had lots of properties, lots of houses, and he would lend them out to people. But he would also keep things in those houses as well, because he had lots of things. So there wouldn't be no need for every single one of those houses to contribute to the Eruv of the Chatzer, because he still uses all of those properties. Also the comment there, Rabbi, one time, Bonius ben Bonius, no, so this was like the Chatzer, I guess, of Bonius ben Bonius, but apparently his father was particularly wealthy, this Bonius fellow. So also the comment to Rabbi, now one time Bonius ben Bonius came to Rabbi, Amalu panu makum leven mea mana. So they saw that Bonius ben Bonius came, and they said, wow, okay, it's a very chashuv a mensch who's come, a very honorable person. So they said we should clear out an honorable position, an honorable place for him, right? This important person has come. Let us give him a good seat in the Beis HaMedrash. Also in a Shachrina, but then after Bonius ben Bonius came, another fellow came. Amrlu, and Rebbe said to them, Panu makum leven mosayim mana. Wow. Go clear away an even better spot for a person who is worth 200 mana. By Bonius ben Bonius, he said clear a space for a person worth, a person of 100 mana. Now this other fellow showed up, and Rebbe says clear away a space for a person of 200 mana. Amr lefan of Rabbi Shmuel bar Yossi. Then Rabbi Shmuel bar Yossi said to Rebbe, Oviv shel zeh yesh lo 1,000 sfinas bayam v'chenegdon 1,000 hayaros bayabasha. Rabbi Shmuel bar Yossi said to Rebbe, he said, hey Rebbe, this fellow Bonius ben Bonius, his father has 1,000 ships and another 1,000 cities. So the point being that Rebbe, I think you might be making a mistake, meaning Bonius ben Bonius came, you gave him a very nice seat, but then you gave this other fellow an even nicer seat, but it's really ben Bonius is really the guy who should be getting the most covet, because after all, his father is very, very wealthy. So, Amrlo, so Rebbe said to Rabbi Shmuel bar Yossi, L'chshetagia eitz al aviv, when you get to his father, i.e., if you see Bonius, Amrlo, say to him, Al t'shagreu b'chelim alalu lefanai, don't send your son to me in those shmendrik looking clothing, because if really your family is so mechubad, then you should really dress the part, and he shouldn't show up wearing, I guess, clothing that would you wouldn't necessarily look at the clothing and say, wow, this person must be from a wealthy family, and that is why Rebbe didn't give him the best possible seat. Says the Gemara, Rebbe Mechabed Asherim, Rabbi Akiva Mechabed Asherim, that both Rebbe and Rabbi Akiva would give honor to wealthy people. Kididarash Rabbi Bar Mari, like Rabbi Bar Mari expounded, Yeshev Olam Lifnei Elokim Chesed Ve'emes Manyin Seru, that the world sits before God, kindness and truth, man, which is like mizonos, food, yin seru, will protect the world. When does the world sit before God? At the time that wealthy people are doing kindness and truth and providing food, that is what preserves the world. Okay? Rabbi Bar Bachano Amar, so now going back to our original halachic discourse, which was that if the homeowner has items in his houses, so then it's considered like he's still using these houses and they don't need to contribute to the Ayruvin hatzeirs. So, Kigon Yosid Shamachresha, for example, a peg of a plow. If he still has the peg of his plow in one of these properties, well, he's using it for storing things. So Amar of Nachman, Rav Nachman clarifies, Tana Devei Shmuel, that was taught in the Besmedrash of Shmuel, Davar Nito b'Shabbos Oser. Davar Sheinu Nito b'Shabbos Eino Oser. So there's a distinction between things that are muktzah and things that are not. If you have something right, so Davar Anito b'Shabbos, something that's not muktzah, something that's movable on Shabbos, Oser. Well then, right, so if the homeowner is keeping things in this property, but there are things that you can move on Shabbos. Well, if the things that you can move on Shabbos, then it's not considered like he's really keeping things there. And that property would have to contribute to the Ayruvin hatzeirs. Davar she'einu nito b'Shabbos, but if it's something that's muktzah, something that you're not allowed to move on Shabbos, well then it's considered kavua and eino oser, and then it's not going to be oser on the chatzer, i.e. these people don't need to contribute any bread to the Eruv. Tanin Amiyachi, we also learn in a brayso like this, Yesh lo tevel, yesh lo ashashes, v'chol davar she'einu nito b'Shabbos eino oser, that if he has tevel, right, untied food, produce, or he has like metal bars of stuff, so these things are muktzah, and therefore, and anything that's unmovable, so it will not be oser, i.e. they would not have to contribute, these properties would not have to contribute to the Eruv of the Chatzer. New Mishnah, maniach beso, v'halach lishbos be'ir acheres. So if you have a fellow who leaves his house for Shabbos, and he goes to spend Shabbos in another city, echad nachri v'echad Yisrael areza oser. So whether this person who leaves is Jewish, whether he's not Jewish, it makes no difference. They would still have to contribute to the Eruv, right? So if you have a Chatzer and you have a bunch of people living there, and somebody goes away for Shabbos, they would still have to contribute to the Eruv for the Chatzer, and if not, then nobody would be able to carry. And as Rashi says, the dira below bailim shmadira, because a apartment, a home, even if the owners are away, is still considered a dira, and they would have to contribute. Divra Meir, that's Rav Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Eino Oser. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, if this fellow goes away for Shabbos, so then he doesn't have to contribute to the Eruv, and he's not going to be Oser on the people from carrying. Rabbi Yossi Omer says, Rabbi Yossi, Nachri Oser Yisrael Eino Oser. So he says, well, there's a distinction between the non-Jew and the Jew. If the non-Jew goes away, so then it's Oser, right? You would still have to do a schirus with him beforehand, because since he doesn't have the halachos of Shabbos, so he can come back in the middle of Shabbos. And therefore, we have to be concerned about that, and we'd have to, work him into our Eruv by doing a schirus. Whereas Yisrael, Eino Oser. But a Jew would not be Oser, Shein Derech Yisrael Lava B'Shabbos, because the Yid is not going to be coming back to the Chatzer on Shabbos, because he's away for Shabbos. So therefore, if he's away, so then he's not going to be Oser, you wouldn't have to include him in the Eruv. Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon, Afilu eniach beso v'alach lishbos eitzel bito ba'osa ha'ir, Eino Oser shekvar isiya milibo. So says Reb Shimon that even if the fellow left his chatzer to go to another, to spend Shabbos by his daughter in the same city, so even so, he would not have to contribute to the Eruv, and it would be no problem, because when he went away for Shabbos, he wasn't planning on coming back, even though he just went to his daughter in the same city. Says the Gemara, Rav halacha Reb Shimon. Rav says that the halacha is like Reb Shimon, v'davka bito, but it's specifically his daughter. Aval b'no lo. Damri inche novach bach kalba ol novach bach gur yisa pok. Interesting. So Rav says the halacha is like Reb Shimon, that even if he goes, to his daughter in the same city, so then he wouldn't be oser, he wouldn't have to contribute to his chatzer's eruv. But he says davka bito, that specifically if he goes to his daughter's house in the city, aval b'no lo. But if he goes to his son's house in the city, so then he might come back on Shabbos. How come? Damri inche, because people say novach bach kalba ol, that if a dog barks at you, well, no problem, you could still go in. Novach bach gur yisa pok, but if a lioness lies at you, you better get out of there. And what he's saying is that if he goes to his daughter for Shabbos and his son-in-law is there, what's the worst that can happen? But if he goes to his son for Shabbos and his daughter-in-law is there, well, if they get in a fight, he's going to have to run. And therefore, there's always going to be the chance that he'll come back to his home base in the middle of Shabbos. So therefore, it's specifically if he goes to his daughter in the city, then you can assume that he's not coming back. All right, new Mishnah. Bor sheben shtei hatzeirs. Oh, so if you have a pit between two hatzeirs, ein memalim mimenu b'Shabbos elim ken asu lo mechitza gavoa asar. Okay, let's go slow. So you have a pit between two hatzeirs, right? So we had talked about a pit between hatzeirs yesterday. That was a more intricate case, I think. In this case, it's basically you have two hatzeirs and there's a wall between them, and then the wall kind of cuts in half a pit. So you have a pit which is 50% in this chatzer and 50% in that chatzer. So ein memalin mimenu b'Shabbos. So you're not allowed to fill up water from that pit on Shabbos, since it's shared by both of them. Elim kain asu lo mechitza gavoa asar tfachim, unless they make a wall that is 10 tfachim tall. Bein milamata, bein mitoch ogno, whether below, whether in the lip, and we're going to explain what this means. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Beis Shammai Omer says, Beis Shammai milamata, that the wall has to be below. Beis Hillel Omer milamala, Beis Hillel says that it can be on top. Omer Reb Yehuda, and says Reb Yehuda, lo te mechitza gedola min hakosel shebeneim, that there is no mechitza that is greater than just the wall that splits the chatzer in half. However, we're going to have to understand what all of these opinions are. Says the Gemara. Now we're going to have a machlokas between Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda about how to understand Beis Shammai, who say that the wall is below, and Beis Hillel, who say that the wall is above. So Rav Huna says, Rav Huna lemata mamish, that when it says that when Beis Shammai says that the wall is below, it means mamish below. What does it mean, mamish below? So what it means is within the well, right? So the well kind of goes down and there's water in the well. So you'd put that wall in mamish in the well, but it wouldn't necessarily be in the water. It would still be it would kind of go down until the water, okay? The Maila, and when Beis Hillel say that the wall, that the partition goes above, it means l'mayla mamish. It means mamish, at the top of the well. V'zeh v'zeh bebor, but they're both in this well or this pit. So, according to Rav Huna, Beis Shammai, who says that you put the wall, this partition below, it means that you put it in the well or in this pit until it reaches the water. That's what it means below. And according to Beis Hillel, you put it just right at the opening of the pit. And as Rav Huna says that, right, v'zeh v'zeh bebor, they're both within the lips of the pit. But according to Beis Hillel, it will be right on the top of it, right at the beginning of the pit. And according to Beis Shammai, it would be mamish until the water level. Rav Yehuda Amar says, Rav Yehuda lemata min hamoyim. Says Rav Yehuda that according to Beis Shammai, when it says that the partition is below, it means like mamish at the bottom of the pit. L'mayla min hamoyim. And when it says above, it means like up to where the water is. So basically, Rav Yehuda's Beis Hillel is the same as Rav Huna's Beis Shammai, that Kilu, it goes in the pit until it reaches the water. Okay, so according to Rav Huna, Beis Shammai says that the partition goes in the pit until it reaches the water, and Beis Hillel says the partition just goes right at the beginning of the pit, right where, right basically right inside the lip of the pit. And according to Rav Yehuda, Beis Shammai says that the partition mamish goes down at the bottom of the pit, and whereas according to Beis Hillel, it would be in the pit, up until the water level. Fawn. Amalei Rabbi bar Rav Chanan leAbaye, says Rabbi bar Rav Chanan to Abaye, Hada Amar Rav Yehuda lemata min amayim. When Rav Yehuda says that according to Beis Shammai, the partition goes all the way down at the bottom of the pit, Mai shna lemata mamish dilo. What's the problem with Rav Huna's opinion of Beis Shammai, right? Meaning, Beis Shammai's opinion, according to Rav Huna and according to Rav Yehuda. So according to Rav Yehuda, it's that the partition goes all the way at the bottom of the pit. According to Rav Huna, it just goes in the pit until the edge of the water, until the water begins. So what Rabbi bar Rav Chanan is asking Abaye, he's saying, what's Rav Yehuda's problem with Rav Huna's opinion? What's Rav Yehuda's problem with Beis Shammai say, right? According to Rav Yehuda, why does Beis Shammai say that the partition has to be all the way at the bottom of the pit and it can't just be up until the water level, right, from the top until the water level? So the Ayruvin Maya, Mistama, is because Rav Yehuda would say, that Beis Shammai would say, that if the partition is only until the water begins, well, all the water is mixed together. There's nothing separating the two sides of the water. So lemata min amayim nami, Ayruvin Maya, but even if the partition is all the way at the bottom of the pit, still, the partition isn't going from the bottom of the pit all the way to the top. So where the partition ends, right, you'll put it at the bottom of the pit, but, it's only, 10 tfachim. So the pit might be 20 tfachim. So there's still going to be water, it's still going to be plenty of water that's getting mixed together above the partition. So Amalei Sabai answers Rabbi bar Rav Chanan, Lo shmi'alach hada Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. No, didn't you hear what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav? Umatuba mishum Reb Chia, and they say it's the name of Reb Chia, they bring it from Reb Chia. Tzarich sheyiro roshan shalkanim l'mayla min hamayim tefach. That this partition would have to go from the bottom of the pit all the way until above the water 1 tefach. So at no point would any of the water actually be mixing together. Okay? According to Beis Shammai, according to Rav Yehuda. Visu, but then Rabbi bar Rav Chanan asks Abaye, Hada Amar Rav Yehuda l'mayla min amoyim, that when Rav Yehuda explains that according to Beis Hillel, the partition goes inside of the pit until the water begins. Mashna l'mayla mamish dilo. Well, what, according to Rav Yehuda's explanation of Beis Hillel, what would be the problem with Rav Huna's explanation of Beis Hillel, which is that the partition only goes right inside the lip of the well, but not further down than that? The Ayruvin Maya l'mayla min amoyim. The Ayruvin Maya. So the issue must be that if the partition simply goes slightly into the well, Rav Yehuda would explain it, according to Beis Hillel, that wouldn't work because the water is going to still be mixed together. But l'mayla min hamayim nami, that wouldn't be a good answer because even according to Rav Yehuda's explanation of Beis Hillel, where the partition is only going until the water begins, ha'ayruvin maya, the water is still going to be mixed together since the partition is only going until the water begins. But there's none of the partition is actually in the water, so therefore all the water is mixed together anyways. So Amar lei lo shmi'alach hadetana Yaakov karchina. So Abaye answers Rabbi bar Rav Chanan. He says, didn't you hear what Rav Yaakov Karchina said? Tzarich she'yishaka roshe kanim b'mayim tefach. That actually it's not enough. So according to Rav Yehuda in his explanation of Beis Hillel, it's not enough that the partition goes until the water begins. It actually has to go under the water a tefach. So it's not completely above the water. And as Rashi explains, that according to Rav Yehuda, the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is about, do you mamish need to have a proper separation between the two sides of the water, that Beis Shammai says yes, you would, and therefore the partition has to go from the bottom of the pit all the way up until 1 tefach above the water line. Whereas according to Beis Hillel, you only need it to look like they're separate. So therefore the partition just needs to go a little bit into the water, but then it doesn't have to go further than that. But now we're going to ask a kasha. Now, we have two statements right now, one from Rav Yehuda and one from Rav Nachman bar Amar Rabba bar Avua. The kasha is really coming from the second part, from Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua, okay? So, Velahada Amar Rav Yehuda, that which Rav Yehuda says, Kora arba materes bechurva, that if you have a dilapidated ruin, okay, but there is still a kora, a crossbeam that's going from one wall to the other, so materes bechurva, so you can view it as though the walls, you know, like if you have a cross beam and there's like two sides, whatever. So the two sides you can view it as if they go down, and if the beam is 4 tefachim thick, well, then you basically, but underneath the beam would be like a shtickle rishus hayachid, and you'd be able to carry there. Okay, under the beam. Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avua, Kora arba materes b'moyim, that if you have, like our pit, okay, and it's between two hatzeirs, and there's a beam above the pit, well then, that would be enough, and you'd be allowed to draw water from the well, from this pit. Haka azil dli leidach gisa, but 1 second, umaisi. But according to Rav Yehuda says that the partitions have to mamish be touching the water. Now here Rav Nachman is saying that no, you can just have a beam above the water, above the pit, and that would be enough. But 1 second, but how could that work? What Rav Yehuda says that the partition has to be in the water. If you only just have a beam above it, the bucket's gonna certainly go to the other side of the water. So the Gemara says, no, kimlu l'rabbanan de'ein dli mahalach yosim rabba tfachim tachas kora. Okay, we can assume that for whatever reason, the deli, the pail, is not going to go under, past the beam into the other side that belongs to the other chatzer. Alright, but miya Ayruvin maya, but still, the water is going to mix together. The water is going to still mix together because the beam isn't, it's above the water. So, Ella, how do you have to answer it? Mishum dekalu shekelu chacham b'mayim. How can you possibly explain, Rav Nachman, that a beam that's just above this pit can work as a separation for the water in the pit, and that now the two hatzeirs would be able to draw water from this pit? So you have to say that it's, as we've seen a few times in the past, kalu shekelu chacham b'mayim, that there are certain leniencies that the chacham made when it comes to water. Ella, Kidaba mine Rabbi Tavla mirav, as Rabbi Tavla asked from Rav, mechitza tzluya ma'ushatater bechurva. The Rabbi Tavla asked Rav, if you have a mechitza tzluya bechurva, right? If you have a dilapidated ruin and there is a wall that is 10 tefachim, but it's not touching the ground, it's like suspended above the ground, right? Like the bottom part of it was destroyed, but the upper area is still there. Can we view it as if it goes down? To which Rav answers, no, that wouldn't work in a dilapidated ruin, because a hanging partition only works when it comes to water. It's a leniency that the chacham have by water. So what do we see? We see that the accepted opinion is that you would be allowed to have this beam going over the pit, and we can view it as though the beam goes down and separates the pit, and therefore we're essentially discarding the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the partition would have to go into the pit until it touches the water and make some kind of a hecker, that there's a separation going on there. No, that's not the case. When it comes to water, we are mekil, and just simply a beam above the pit would be enough. Rabbi Yehuda lotei mechitza. So now it says that we're moving on in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda said that you really, so Rav Huna and Rabbi Yehuda were explaining Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, saying that you have to have these mechitzas in the pit. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the lote mechitza yoser, what does it say? The mechitza gedola min hakosel shebeneim. Simply the wall that is separating between the two chatzers and goes over the pit, that would be enough to be able to separate the pit. So Amr Rabbi Yehuda Lotem. Okay, so Amr Rabba Bar Bachana Amr Rabbi Yochanan says Rabba Bar Bachana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yehuda b'shitas Rabbi Yossi Amr. Okay, the Rabbi Yehuda is saying like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda who says that if you have this wall and this wall is 10 tefachim is 10 tefachim tall and it goes over this pit, well then we can view it as if it goes down into the pit. So that is like Rabbi Yossi. The Amar, the Rabbi Yossi says in the context of Sukkah, mechitza tzluya materes, that you're allowed to have a wall that is hanging. Afilu bayabasha, not just on water, but even on dry land. The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, that if when you're building your sukkah and you have walls and they go from the top down, so the 10 tefachim tall, they reach the schach, but they don't quite reach the earth. So so if there's 3 tefachim between the bottom of the partition and the ground, well then it's pasul. And as we've learned in other places, because since goats would be able to walk under the wall, so therefore the wall is not a kosher wall. Mimata l'mayla. However, if the wall reaches the ground, im gavos yud tfachim kishera, if they're 10 tfachim tall, well then the walls are acceptable even if they don't reach the schach, because we could say good asik that the wall continues upwards until it reaches the schach. However, when it comes to good achis, to say that the wall extends downward, we really don't say it so much lemaisa, because it would have to be within 3 tefachim of the ground, in which case we would just say lavud, and if it's more than that, then the goats can get under it. The only time when we say that it would work, that we can view it as if the wall continues down, is by water. Rabbi Yossi Omer, however, Rabbi Yossi says, Kishem shemilamata lemala asara, that just like when the wall goes from the earth and upwards, we could say that as long as it's 10 tefachim, we can view it as though it reaches the schach. Kach milamayla lemata asara, well also from the top down, as long as it's 10 tefachim, we can view it as though it continues down to the earth. So we'll say that just like Rabbi Yossi says that if you have a wall that's 10 tefachim, we can view it as though it extends downwards. So that's like Rabbi Yehuda also was saying that this wall that separates between the 2 hatzeirs, we're viewing it as it continues down into the pit. Vilohi, the Gemara says, no, that is not correct. Lo Rabbi Yehuda savar like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. Lo Rabbi Yossi savar like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda lo savar like Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yehuda, who says that by the wall between the 2 hatzeirs, we view it as though the wall continues down into the pit. He doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, who says that we view the sukkah wall as if it reaches the ground, because Adkan lo ka'am Rabbi Yehuda ela be'eruvei hatzeirs derabanan. Because Rabbi Yehuda is only willing to say that the wall continues down into the pit by Ayruvin hatzeirs, because we're talking about a din derabanan over here. Aval sukkah, but when it comes to a sukkah, the oraisa lo. But if it comes to a sukkah, which is a mitzvah the oraisa, Rabbi Yehuda would not say that we can just simply view it as though the wall continues down to the earth. V'lo Rabbi Yossi savar like Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, because Adkan lo ka'am Rabbi Yossi ela b'sukkah de iser eseu. Rabbi Yossi says that the wall by a sukkah can go down to the ground, because at the end of the day, it's not something that there's a chiyuv misa involved over here. It's a mitzvah saseh. If you don't do, if you mess up by your sukkah, so you violate a mitzvah saseh. But, however, aval Shabbos, but when it comes to Shabbos, the iser skilo, which Shabbos, of course, is something that has a liability for stoning. That's pretty serious. So then Rabbi Yossi would not extend this halacha that the walls would extend downwards to Ayruvin, even though Ayruvin are midirabanan. But Shabbos as a concept is something that has an issur of skila involved with it, and therefore he's unwilling to say that even by Eruv, and as Rashi points out, called the takun derabanan kein de oraisa takun, that all dinim derabanan, we have to treat them with the same stringencies as the oraisas, right? With all the halachas as if it was a de oraisa, and therefore Rabbi Yossi, while when it comes to Sukkah, he's willing to say that we can view it as though the wall continues down to the earth, he would be unwilling to say that by Ayruvin, since it's in the context of Shabbos, which carries with it an Isser Skila. V'im Tomar, and if you're going to say, so maise shenaise b'tzipori al pimi naise, well, that story that happened in Tzipori, who was it based on? So of course, Rabbi Yossi was in Tzipori, right? We learned in the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Lamed Gimel, right? We say that, right? There was that story with Reb Shimon and Reb Yossi and Reb Yehuda about the Romans, and Reb Yossi kept quiet, and he was exiled to Tzipori. So Reb Yossi was generally the rabbi of Tzipori. And there was a story in Tzipori where, and we're going to see it in a minute, where essentially there were walls that were treated as if they went as if they went down to the ground, as if they extended down to the ground on Shabbos. So now Rabbi Yossi just said that he wouldn't say that walls extend down to the ground on Shabbos. Well, if that's the case, well then who was the rabbi in the context of this story in Tzipori where we treated it as if the walls do go down to the ground on Shabbos? So Lo al pi Rabbi Yossi, it couldn't have been on Rabbi Yossi's watch. Ela al pi Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. Naisa, it was under the watch of Rabbi Yossi's son, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. T'chi asa Rav Dimi Omar. Then when Rav Dimi came, he said, Pam achas shachachu v'lo eviu sefer Torah mibod yom. That one time they forgot and they didn't bring the sefer Torah to the shul on Shabbos. Right, and it was as Rashi, it was the Gos Abach. Somebody changes the text to say that. I think Rashi says, that the shul was in the same chutzner as where the Sefer Torah was. The Sefer Torah was in a house, and in the same chutzner there was a synagogue. And they forgot to bring the Sefer Torah to the synagogue on Shabbos, and they didn't make an Eruv. Right, from before Shabbos, they forgot to bring the Sefer Torah, and there was no Eruv. So L'machar, so on Shabbos, Parsu Sadin ala Amudim, so there were some, they had some cloth, some like sheet over some pillar, some beams. They viewed Sefer Torah, and they viewed that as if it was like a movable kind of like Rishus HaYachid, V'karubo, and they read Sefer Torah in shul. Parsu l'chatchila mishari. But one second, how could it be that they actually took like a sheet and like spread it out on these beams? But we learned in Masechta Shabbos that everyone agrees that you're not allowed to make even a temporary ohel, structure on dwelling on Shabbos, tent on Shabbos. So no, so rather what the story was that they couldn't have just taken these sheets and put them over these beams, because exactly that would be creating an ohel, and that would be not allowed, even though it's just simply an ohel arai. So they found the sheet that was already extended over these I don't know what to call them, beams, or these things that they would carry. And then they transported the Sefer Torah under this like canopy sheet kind of thing. And in that case, it was talking about where the sheets didn't reach all the way to the ground, and yet we said that was acceptable. So it couldn't have been Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi wouldn't have said that in the context of Shabbos, since it has an Isser Skila involved with it. So it must have been his son Rabbi Shema Rabbi Yossi Chever. That was Daf Pei Vav of Masechta Ayruvin. So the big, the first like kind of big juicy machlokas today was when you have this pit that is between two hatzeirs, how can you put a partition there so that the two hatzeirs can draw water on Shabbos? So Rav Huna explains that according to Beis Shammai, the partition would have to go up until it reaches the water. According to Beis Hillel, it wouldn't have to go quite up to the water, it would just have to be within the lip of the well. According to Rav Yehuda, according to Beis Shammai, the partition mamash has to be all the way at the bottom of the well, and then it goes from the bottom of the well until above the water level. And according to Beis Hillel, it just needs to go from the top of the well until one tefach into the water, and not more than that. We had the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Well, then we also had the opinion of Rav Nachman, who says that all you need is a beam above it, which and we have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the wall of the chutzner would serve as to divide it. But it sounds like the most lenient opinion would be Rav Nachman, who says that all you really need is a beam. As long as you have a beam that's 4 tefachim above it, then we can view it as if it goes down into the water, because kalu shekelu chacham b'mayim is one of the leniencies that the rabbis had when it came to water. Then at the end we had this, we brought in this machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and the chachamim regarding Succah, that according to the chachamim, if you have a partition that's 10 tefachim tall and it goes from the schach downwards, we cannot say that it's as if it reaches the ground. According to Rabbi Yossi, you can say that it reaches the ground. However, we brought that because we wanted to say that maybe Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda are saying something similar. Rabbi Yehuda, who says that by Ayruvin, that by this chutzner, the wall that goes over the pit, we view it as if it goes into the pit. So The Gemara says that you can't compare them. Rabbi Yehuda would say that he's only willing to say that by Ayruvin, which is Derabanan, but he wouldn't say it by Succah, which is Doraisa. Rabbi Yossi says that Rabbi Yossi is only willing to say that the wall goes down by Succah, which is a mitzvah saseh, but by Ayruvin, which is in connection to Shabbos, which has Isur Skila associated with it, he would not extend his halacha about the walls going down to the ground. Chevre, peace out.